think 1.5 degree is very far away. We need to accept and internalize the true cost of a ton of CO2. In the end, ESG risks are financial risks. The energy transition for climate goals is to get on track for net zero. We will not just make a turnaround and say, now we're doing green business. It's important to always say sustainability is not about values, it's about value. This is a question of survival.
Hello everyone, my name is Christian Moldenhauer. I'm Managing Director of Expert Powerhouse, Europe's fastest growing consulting network. At Expert Powerhouse, we're helping teams all over the world with on-demand consultants, and we're serving more than 200 leading companies in consulting and industries with freelance talent. It's my pleasure today to host our 7th EPH talk. Thanks everyone for joining in today. And as we have quite a number of participants, I would like to know from you, from where are you joining in today? There is a little chat window. Please put it in the comments. I'd love to see from where are you joining in today. And as we have friends coming through, I'd also, of course, like to invite you to follow our Expert Powerhouse LinkedIn page. It's super simple. Just click the little bell at the top of the page and you'll get notified first about new content from Expert Powerhouse. Today, we're going to speak about how to anchor sustainability in the organization. And of course, sustainability has become a real matter of survival for us humans and consequently also for business. And interestingly, according to Forbes, 90% of executives say it's really important, but only 60% of companies have a sustainability strategy. So think about that. And it's great. Here are coming through a lot of German replies from Munich, from Hamburg, from Lübeck, Münster, Stuttgart. We have some international participants and really nice to see you all. We want to talk about sustainability today. For this, we have invited David Radermacher, Vice President of Sustainability at E.ON. And of course, E.ON is one of the world's largest utilities, which operates in 30 countries and has over 33 million customers. So he's a great person to talk to about sustainability. David has been in the industry for 17 years and for more than a decade at E.ON. He has been a speaker at the United Nations Conference for Climate Change and, of course, multiple other global events as well. He has seen the sustainability department evolving from really being a small part of the organization to now being at the forefront of the business. So without further ado, welcome, David.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's pleasure, absolute pleasure to speak with you today. And David, welcome to our Expert Powerhouse talk. To kick it off, I would basically ask you as an intro, we see a lot of companies talking about sustainability, but actually what makes it so difficult for many companies to have a sustainability strategy and then also to implement it?
Fantastic question to kick it off. I think for many companies, sustainability has for too long been treated as a completely separate thing. There was a sustainability department at the end of the corridor, like the weird guys, and they tell the same corporate story like everybody else, but in a slightly greener way, because there might be some investors that are interested. That led to a completely isolated discussion in companies. These sustainability departments for years had to drive an agenda against the whole hurdles in the organization. And this parallel universe that has been created, an own community of people, of like-minded people, then had the challenge to set a strategy. And then suddenly were asked by the board of management, because suddenly it was on board level attention, and they had to set a strategy that was somewhat aligned to the corporate strategy, didn't want to have any distraction, but also setting the right tone externally. And that's very difficult when of course, you have conflicts of interest, you have trade-offs, but to understand the true value of sustainability is a big exercise. It really starts with setting or really analyzing the purpose, the reason for being of a corporate in society, and then realigning corporate strategy to sustainability rather than setting an own sustainability strategy. And I think that's what makes it so difficult. It was, in many cases, the attempt was to have a minimal invasive way of embedding sustainability, but it really requires a true reflection of the role of the company in society.
Very interesting you say this. It needs to be embedded. Let's start maybe at the beginning. So I know you've been a long time now with E.ON. How did it evolve there? So at the beginning, was it that small unit, and how did it evolve over time?
It was a slightly deficit-oriented, coming from the old days of the energy transition, really to foster initiatives like, when you look back some years, really a decade or so, it was around coal. There was better coal initiatives, stuff like this, where you say, okay, we need coal in the energy transition. We know it's bad, but let's try to make it as socially viable as possible. So always driving initiatives that NGOs want to hear, but don't disturb the core business. And that's now, let's say, 15, 20 years ago. When I took over that role in 2018, there was still that atmosphere around sustainability. Yeah, it's the right thing, but this will cost us money. This will definitely reduce our returns. You can do it in the conventional way, or you do it in the sustainable way, and then it's just a bit more expensive. But at that time, the action plan on sustainable finance at EU level kicked off. It was the first beginnings of the Green Deal, etc. And the mindset shifted to say, okay, we need to have an open discussion at board. And there was still a very small sustainability team, but we triggered the right discussions around strategy. And we had a very early beginning of redefining how sustainability should be organized. And based on this core discussion, it was important that we didn't only have it with our CEO, but also our CFO, because it's a financial topic. And it's important to have that tone from the top. I think it's important to have the tone from the top from both the CEO and the CFO, to have that buy-in from both. And we had discussions in the supervisory board. There was a strong push from investors too. And that, of course, helped to catalyze the development.
And what was the challenge there? Do you recall some particular hard discussions or talking points? You mentioned, of course, 15 years ago, it was the mindset of sustainability will cost us money, leave us alone as much as it doesn't cost too much. But clearly that has changed dramatically now. What were those hard discussions that you had to come to the point where you are today?
I think it's important to, in the first place, accept a challenge of educating people. It was really an educational issue because, of course, board members, senior executives have seen it all, they know it all. And then you're approaching them with a story to say sustainability is not a threat, but an opportunity. If we really challenge the status quo and really understand sustainability holistically, and that's not the activist view from outside, but really understand that it's about ensuring the future viability of the business, you take the discussion to a new level. And I have set myself the agenda to build bridges in the beginning. You have to understand that each company plays an important role in solving societal challenges. So I try to explicitly avoid the term sustainability. Because when you say sustainability, everyone gets aggravated. Everybody leans back and thinks they're in an NGO discussion. And that's not the case. So I said, no, in the end, it's your best interest for stakeholders and shareholders to ensure that the company exists in the midterm and not only short term. And what you got to do is understand the role the company has in solving societal challenges. And for E.ON, that is providing affordable and reliable energy. Security of supply is value for society. It's business for society. And because we know what happens when we have a major power disruption and you have interruptions in the system, and we know it's awkward when you have to turn on candles at night, but after 4 days you have anarchy. So you know that 4 days of full power outage in a European society would lead to anarchy. And if you understand, in your core business, do business for society, derive a different purpose and ambition for yourself on sustainability. And I think that was important to get away from, you have to do things differently in a greener way, but to really understand what's our value for society.
And is that something that you would also transfer to other businesses? So I know now energy is, of course, super purpose-driven. You say 4 days without energy, we have anarchy in Europe, which, of course, no one would like to have. How would you transfer this purpose discussion maybe to other industries? Are there examples that you could highlight?
Take Siemens, for example. Siemens Healthineers, that's healthcare business. And of course, we all know the importance of technology in hospitals, in healthcare in general. That's social value. I think sustainability is not always about climate. It's about really understanding the value to society of the core business. And in some cases, that's a bit harder. And in other cases, it's a bit easier. But it's always important to challenge yourself and to understand the true value of why does this company exist? Why should people be willing to invest money in us or pay for our services? Because the company in societies is never isolated. It's always part of a system of stakeholders. And to really understand what's our role beyond making money and providing jobs, that's important.
And would you say from your discussions, you mentioned you had discussions with the board, with the CFO, bringing a lot of stakeholders in. Was it more focused on the risks of not being existent anymore in the midterm, or also on the benefits of maybe sticking out of the crowd of your peers and creating maybe some competitive advantage through sustainability?
I think it's always both. It's two sides of the same medal. To say, if we manage to align to the energy transition, to really bring sustainability to the core of our corporate strategy, this of course gives us access to massive opportunities to foster our business, to grow our business. At the same time, if we don't manage, society will evolve and societal trends cannot be neglected. This definitely is a risk to us. And so it's always the two aspects of the same story.
Okay. And so you've been recently rated by CDP as a level company, basically being in the top 2% of over 12,000 companies. So clearly E.ON does something right there. How you would describe the status quo? What is the success and the model that you run currently with the sustainability department?
Yeah, I had a discussion with our CFO probably 4 years ago, where he said, we're being pressured by investors, by supervisory board, etc. And how can we really make sustainability fly? How can we really implement it in the organization? I said, we have to stop treating it as a different animal. Sustainability, we have to get rid of my job, knowing that this risk is very low, that there's no sustainability function in a company anymore, but to make it as small as possible, because sustainability needs to be integrated in every leader's mandate. It needs to be integrated in all corporate functions. And so we drafted something. It was really only a piece of paper and a pen. And I said, we need to stop treating ESG data as ESG data. In the end, it's non-financial data, and it's a part of the whole data set, the whole transparency exercise in the company. So we need to treat ESG data just like financial data. And financial data is handled by accounting and not by some other function at the end of the corridor, like ESG data. So I said, target picture needs to be that ESG data is treated just the way like financial data. So it needs to be handled by accounting. And we don't need a separate sustainability report. We need to tell our story. It needs to be a fully aligned story, and it needs to be integrated into the annual report. And the annual report is published by investor relations. That's the investor relation function at E.ON. So why shouldn't they be responsible for the sustainability report and integrating it into one integrated report? And also risk management. We talk a lot about, in regulation, a lot about non-financial risk, ESG risk, etc. Why shouldn't this be part of the risk management function that handle financial data? Because in the end, ESG risks are financial risks. And so that has taken us some time now, but we now finally have set up the group sustainability function as a very small think tank in corporate strategy. So sustainability is part of corporate strategy. And we've integrated all these aspects like accounting, ESG accounting into accounting, the disclosure topic into investor relations, and also risk management into risk management. And we're continuing this journey to say sustainability communication. So really the communication about sustainability progress is part of corporate communication. And by this, the central sustainability team that I'm working with is really just setting the overall ambition. So continuing to integrate our sustainability targets into the remuneration system. So the bonuses of our board and top executives, and to really steer the group on sustainability, but always in line with corporate strategy. So sustainability targets have to be in line with our financial targets. And we don't want to leave our leaders and the operational units with trade-offs between, okay, I can fulfill the sustainability target, but not the business target. We need to avoid this.
And how do you do it practically? I can imagine there is a scorecard or something. How do you actually hold your executives accountable for the sustainability targets? It's just become another part of their bonus compensation. How could we best think about
the general individual bonuses is based on a long-term and a short-term incentive. The long-term incentive is a 4-year period, is valid for all executives. So E.ON has 70,000 employees and roughly 1,500 executives. And all executives have their bonus based on 25% ESG targets. And it's not only the climate targets of the group, but also diversity targets, health and safety targets, and then more holistically ESG rating performance. So that's basically that one target for everybody. And we set a new target for the sustainability index of 4 components every year for the next 4 years. So it's a cascading system. And in addition to this, there's individual targets on, for example, female executives, on health and safety topics that are on the short-term incentives, so on the annual target letter for each CEO, CFO, whatever, of operational units. But the most important aspect is really that we have broken down our climate targets that are science-based target approved, and we've broken them down on management unit level. So the operational units underneath the group have received their own decarbonization plan up until 2030. And in the first step, we have broken down that ambition that we have on the segments of E.ON, so our networks business, our customer business, etc. And we have then asked each unit, take E.ON in Sweden, E.ON networks business in Sweden, or our customer business, our sales business in Germany, each unit to deliver a credible but ambitious decarbonization plan until 2030. And so we've done this bottom-up validation. We've not only just set targets and said, deal with this, we've asked them for their opinion. How will your business develop from a CO2 perspective? We've integrated this, and we continuously do gap analyses and derive countermeasures and talk to units, and also bring this into the annual performance discussions. So when they at board level talk about midterm planning and how much investment, how much capex each unit receives, we're also triggering the discussion, how is this linked to sustainability targets, especially the climate targets? And then going forward, we also have this integrated into M&A processes. So whenever we think about selling or buying another company, we always look at the implications on our climate target.
And it's super interesting. Yeah, as I understand it, you say it's in every function you have built in this aspect. And what comes just to my mind, being a consultant for almost 10 years, also in the past, before founding Expert Powerhouse, are of course multiple approaches how you can start implementation and change in the organization, having a roadmap, having specific goals, thinking about how you shift the mindsets of people, establishing new processes, new data lakes, yet transparencies, KPIs. So it seems that's embedded in every single department. How did you kick it off? Did you go function by function? Did you go with a full approach lined out into the organization? Did you co-develop? How did you get it?
I think the most important part was really integrating it into the finance department. And so we kicked off a project, or more a program, with our CFO, where he asked me to lead that project, but I rejected because I said it needs to be really owned by the finance organization. If I continue to kick knees and try to convince people to please join me on that sustainability journey, it won't work. We need from the finance organization that knows the finance organization by heart and then leads the program to implement ESG. That's what it was called then, the ESG implementation project. And we really looked at each function in the CFO department. What's actually the value add from this function on the sustainability agenda? And as I now also said, the accounting function is the best place in the company to deal with auditors, to do data processes on financial data. So that's, of course, the most or the best place to integrate ESG data management. And that's what we've done. And then in the next step, we've also looked at mirroring this in the operational units, because operational units in different countries have their own CFO department. We have implemented in each unit an ESG reporting manager that collects all data for group level. So group, of course, on an annual basis, the full set of ESG data bottom up delivered, just like financial data. So we've then really not only had the central project at holding level, but really mirrored this in the operational units. And by now, other than in the past, these ESG reporting managers hand the full set of data, the ESG data set from each operational unit, to the local CFO and have it signed off before it's delivered to the unit. It was not the case in the past, where you had HSE people, you had HR people collecting data and just submitting it. By this, we've also taken the data quality to a new level. And that's really important when you start steering a group. You need to have accurate data.
And that is an interesting point. How did you do it? Did every CFO receive an extra data training, basically, on sustainability data, how to measure it? Did you have to bring the accounting departments basically into a new world of data they had to deal with? How did that go?
We said it's important to have the joint expertise in that accounting team. So we've really set up at holding level a new accounting team that's called the ESG reporting team. And we've staffed it 50% from accounting people, accounting background, and 50% from the sustainability team. So we really brought together that expertise, and that works very well. But of course, we also had to do training, a lot of training for our colleagues in the operational units in all countries where E.ON is operating to bring them up to speed. And we provided, of course, really dedicated trainings for them. But also, it is somewhat bureaucratic, but you need to have topics like ESG handbooks, where you really describe each and every KPI, how it is measured, what data points you need, on what frequency, how you calculate it. And that's also very important to raise the data quality to a level that you can actually steer on it.
What were some challenges maybe that came across in those discussions? Where you say, okay, maybe the data quality is not good enough, we cannot take decisions, and then maybe opt for the pure financial view again because we cannot really rely on the sustainability data?
We've done this in the midst of a crisis. First COVID, now the energy crisis in Europe. And of course, every operational unit had their own struggles. So they were all, of course, not waiting for the next corporate exercise to change something. But I think it was a lot of, again, education. It was important to have that tone from the top, to have the CEO, CFO commitment. This is going to happen. This is going to be transformational for us as a group. And we need to rely on your expertise, on your collaboration to make this a success. And that, of course, is the starting point. And then it was, of course, a lot of listening, a lot of stakeholder management. And of course, it also was additional effort. So we needed to acknowledge that other parts maybe didn't run as fast as we thought they would. And there's the conflicts of interest on the operational unit level to say, okay, now we have crisis management on top of this, or everybody is in home office, so you don't do classroom trainings. That, of course, required us to rethink our approach quite a few times and just continue.
How long overall did the process take? So is it the 4 years that you described? And what were I would say, like the key milestones along that way, and also the milestones that you have still ahead?
I think the first initial discussion with our CFO, that was roughly 3.5, 4 years ago, and that was just a one-on-one we had. And in that time, we also had a change on our CEO position after decades. And with our new CEO, Leo Birnbaum, we also had to onboard him and really get him up to speed. He was in part of the board of management before. But of course, one key milestone definitely was that Leo has set his agenda for his CEO position. And he said there's 3 priorities: it's sustainability, digitization, and growth. And by this, of course, the whole data topic on ESG, of course, gained momentum because it's sustainability and it's digitization. We need to do ESG processes in a lot more digital way. It needs to be fact-based. It's not about opinions. It's about facts. And that, of course, helped. So the project itself, to really challenge the status quo, to develop a concept and then finally implement it, roughly took a year. But of course, there was a lot of pre-work done. And afterwards, the organizational implementation continued to develop. And it's a journey, and at the end yet.
Thanks for sharing. So maybe as not everyone from is in the energy space, there was one topic I wanted to also touch base on. In the media, there is often a lot of buzz around the climate goals, CO2 reductions. There are also a lot of rankings out there from different providers, rankings that are generally there, rankings that you can buy. And of course, investors are also looking increasingly for companies to invest into that are very sustainable. So if you're starting that topic at a company, which one is the most important one for investors? Is it the E? Is it the S? Is it the G? What would be your points on that?
You're the consultant, but I'll give you the consultant answer. It depends. It really is the case. It really depends on the business model. So, of course, investors that invest in the energy world, of course, look at the environmental topics, at the climate goals. Very important. But of course, in the midst of the crisis, we've now seen topics like affordability of energy and also security of energy, security of supply, reliability of energy. Will there be enough natural gas from Russia in winter? And these topics back on the agenda, and that's the social dimension. So we have seen that in our discussions with also rating agencies like Moody's, Standard & Poor's, etc., these topics were back on the agenda. One has to know E.ON is fully focused on Europe. We have our core business almost exclusively in Europe, and affordability of energy and security of supply has not been a big topic most recently, up until now. So the social topics are back on the agenda. But of course, the energy transition has one purpose, and that is for climate goals. Get on track for net zero. And that's why for our investors, the ESG dimension that's most relevant is climate. But when you talk about rating agencies, we see that especially smaller investors rely on ESG ratings. And that's more the holistic view. Climate really stands out of that buzz of a lot of data points. But in the end, it's about getting to minimum level of compliance in most of the dimensions, and then choosing for your own ambition the one dimension that is most prominently linked to the business model. And for energy, that's climate. For other companies from other industries, this will be different. But I think climate is a must. Plus, it always depends, how do you tell the story of the corporate? What's the purpose? What's the role in society?
If you were, let's say, at a company and you're just starting, you maybe have a rough sustainability strategy and you want to implement it. Yeah? And I always think about it as a core, and there are different measures around it that you can do, and a second layer and a third layer of things you can do. But there is maybe a core of things that you need to have in place, that you need to do in order to implement a strategy. Yeah? If we sum it up from the discussion, if you were to say, David, what are the 2 to 3 tips for executives, managers, really, that you need to have in place when getting your strategy implemented?
Only set relevant targets. Climate targets for E.ON are relevant because it's directly linked to our business. And we said we pick that one dimension where we want to be leading. And you mentioned CDP as one of the ratings where we are A-listed. But this is one of very few. We have taken the path to say we're not playing every rating. We're not participating in every rating because it's too much effort. And we want to have a stable data set, but we don't want to develop a data set, an ESG data set, and the whole reporting processes to fulfill every rating, because every rating is different and every investor has different requirements. You have to develop also the back to stand some criticism. So we said we want to be leading in climate, but for human rights, for example, with full respect for human rights, but this is not a differentiator for us. So we have the processes to be compliant, to really improve people's lives, but this is nothing where we strategically put a focus on, because we're almost exclusively in Europe. We know what we have to do. Health and safety is an issue for us, and that's where we want to be leading together with climate. But it's not about the whole human rights topic, like, for example, the textile industry has. You always have to look at your exposure and where can you really have an impact, positive, and where do you have a negative impact? And that's where you set the focus and then develop an agenda around this. So you have to, of course, match your ambition with your data quality. So for us, it's important to have the highest data quality in climate topics, because that's where we have the ambition, where we're visible, where we're exposed. But do we have to have the highest visibility on biodiversity topics? No, probably not, because we're not in agriculture. It's still a topic for us, but you definitely have to differentiate. You can't boil the ocean. You can't meet every requirement, every rating, and every investor demand too. So stay focused, develop, as you said, a core of highest relevant topics, material topics for the individual business case or the business model and the corporate, and then tick boxes around this.
Sounds like a great advice. And thanks for sharing with that. And also looking at the time a bit, yeah, I would probably open it up for questions. Also to the audience, of course, you're invited to ask questions. Please put them just in the comment field and we take them up as they come in. There were a couple of questions that we got asked prior to the talk by some interested people. There was this question, of course, around what is your favorite example of an organization that is embracing sustainability very seriously in addition to E.ON?
I think there's quite a few. I think, of course, you would look at companies like Patagonia. It's at the very heart of the company. And that's, of course, one of these lighthouse projects that stand out. But I think when more realistically go away from these extremely purpose-driven businesses, I think Bayer is a good example, because Bayer has seen massive shitstorms around Monsanto deal, and at the same time, at some point understood that this is a question of survival. They have set up a really prominent sustainability team. They have extremely professional engaged with NGOs to really understand the criticism. they were very humble in that discussion and formed an organization around this to really understand what's the societal need, what are the challenges, what is NGO criticism, and what role can we play in the future. And the CEO, Werner Baumann, really then developed an agenda to say, I want to really transform this company, realign Bayer with society. And it has really seen an improvement in the way how Bayer is perceived. And actually that leads to the value of the companies. I think it's important to always, sustainability is not about values, it's about value. In the end, it's about enterprise value. And this is an economic discussion for corporates in the very beginning. Of course, it's also about moral and it's also about values. But finally, if you want to convince board of management, you need to really understand the value for the enterprise. And Bayer did definitely understand, they had to understand the hard way, but then also developed an agenda where they really said, we want to drive impact. And they have engaged massively with also grassroots movements in Latin America and really push sustainability to a level where people are openly confronted by right-wing movements, for example, in the US. And that's something they stand that pain because they think they're right on track. And you will lose people on that way because not everybody, not the full political spectrum will support you. We see in the US, for example, also some states that challenged BlackRock on doing ESG investments because BlackRock will not invest in oil and in coal in certain US states anymore. And there's backlash, of course, from Republican governors of these states. Yeah, you have to stand that. That is, that transformation will not always be smooth. And I think Bayer is one of these examples that has really taken it seriously.
So standing basically to your true north, you say, and of course, yeah, not everyone likes everything. So there might be the losses that you mentioned. There is another question, maybe linking to that economic discussion. Do you think we will make the 1.5 degree goal in Europe? And if not, will the companies that invested heavily will be at a disadvantage compared to those that harvested unsustainably?
Good question. So I have to admit that I think 1.5 degree is very far away, and there's hardly any reason to believe we will meet it. So in a very dark world, I would say we probably globally will miss 1.5 degrees and then activate the whole money that is just on bank accounts without any interest, activate that money to go into direct air capture and try to solve it. Like, I think we will definitely miss it, but I think there's reason for hope because we see a lot of developments that go in the right direction. The question is always, is it fast enough? We see that renewables globally are the cheapest form of energy production, energy generation, and that really helps. And you also see that when you look at Europe and the question on will companies that go the sustainable way or companies that really harvest the fossil era until the very end survive, I think we already see enough examples where companies most consequently focus on the new energy world, and that is for good reason, because that's future-proof. You will not switch at the end of, let's say, 2030, you will not just make a turnaround and say, and now we're doing green business. That won't work. It's about building our capabilities, building our processes and culture and mindset. It's really, we already have the war for talent in Europe, in the middle of Europe. It is a struggle to find good people, the right people in time. And when you continue going the old way, it will lead to massive shortages of skilled workers. And that's really not sustainable.
Thank you. Another question came through from Dirk, and thanks for raising that. He's asking to set a focus for the sustainability topics that are strongly linked to the core. Have you used the classical materiality analysis tools to find this focus? Because typically those surveys might lead to the impression that everything is important, so it's difficult to build a strategy on it.
Thanks for that question, Dirk. Of course, we have done materiality analysis because everyone expects you to do it. It always led to the answers you already knew. And that's okay. I think materiality analysis right now is the method for reporting, for setting, for proving that you set the right topics. But I think it's more important to really listen to a diverse set of stakeholders on a constant basis and not as a one-time exercise for reporting. Materiality analysis, if you take it seriously, will give you the right results. But it's the question of, do you really need to comply with the standards like GRI, etc., on materiality analysis to find the right topics, or is it rather a mindset thing to speak to NGOs, to listen to investors, to listen to employees to find the right topics. And it's more about a general stakeholder approach. And then the materiality analysis will hopefully deliver the same results. I have to admit, I'm not the biggest fan, and we've tried different methods in the past to prove that we set the right topics. But in a nutshell, I think if you take the topic sustainability seriously, you'll have multiple ways of getting to set the right topics.
Thank you. Maybe we have room for one or two more questions. Please, of course, if everyone wants to ask it, type it in the chat and we can take it up. There was also one question asked prior to the event, that is, if you were to convince stakeholders of creating a new sustainability department, how can you best quantify the benefits of having a sustainability department to convince them?
I think it's the case for the Central Sustainability Department is quite easy because everybody talks about sustainability. It's a bit like corporate health management. Everyone who has been on a diet or now is going vegan or something thinks they can do corporate health management. But of course, there's a science to this. And this is a complex world that has derived from a rather parallel universe in the corporate landscape. And it's important to build up that expertise on also topics that Dirk just mentioned, materiality analysis. There's very specific sustainability topics that need to be handled. And although everybody talks about it and thinks they're on it, I think it's really important to have a dedicated team that can also differentiate between what are the nice to haves and what are the must.
Thanks. So I'll probably have one last question for David. Yeah. This is also a bit, of course, my personal question. But if you think about the current developments, and of course, there are multiple crises going on. So sustainability, oftentimes, you need to also push to still have that focus. But what would make you personally most happy with regards to sustainability developments in the next 5 years?
I think globally, we have all been a bit devastated about the results of COP27. But really seeing the spirit in Sharm el-Sheikh and seeing the background talks, it does give me some hope that we're entering a new era. Because, of course, when you see the results of the global climate conferences, it's always the common denominator at the end of the discussions of 200 nations. Everyone has to agree to one piece of paper. And it's actually a miracle that anything comes out of COP. But I think what's giving me hope for the next COP in Dubai and also then COP29 and continuing that journey is this is the last form of multilateralism that we have globally in a world of crisis, in a world of trade wars. And this is the last format where literally almost all nations get together to talk about one issue because it's a global issue. And we need global answers for this. And we have seen that, especially due to the leadership of the European Union and especially Germany, in an extremely positive way, feminist external politics of Annalena Baerbock and the whole German delegation, it was a completely new dynamic in the climate negotiations. And we now need to see that this delivers results in Dubai and beyond, because we've seen that while the final piece of paper at COP28 was not satisfying, the dynamics and the negotiations, especially between developed countries and developing countries in the global south, has been a completely new form of accepting loss and damage and also accepting that we really need to step up in our efforts. And I think Dubai can really be one of the places where we see really a step change. And this is, I think it's all about this. And if COP28 manages to deliver, really pick up that dynamic that evolved, that you don't see in the final piece of paper, but you see it in the majority chairs, in the negotiations in the background. And from our discussions with NGOs in Sharm el-Sheikh, this is really something that gives hope that there can be a momentum.
And there were 3 more questions came in, so I'm not sure if we have time for all of them, but let's go through. I think the one that links most to the discussion you just had from Ashna. As per our experience, how can policymakers and government incentivize the development and adoption of sustainable energy technology?
I think it's all about internalizing true cost of carbon. And that holds true for corporates as for policymakers and governments. In the end, we need a global carbon price. We need a global CO2 price. We need to accept and internalize the true cost, the societal cost of a ton of CO2. And then the rest is then market mechanism.
Very clear answer. Sophia asks, thanks for sharing your experience. Very interesting. There is a question regarding SBTi and the decarbonization plans for every management unit. Yeah? How were you able to determine the specific plans? Would you again recommend doing mixed staffing similar to the accounting example that we discussed?
Good question. I believe that you have to hand it to the right people, of course, in the organization. And we decided to leave it to each unit themselves to find the right people. They knew the importance and they managed to find the right people because every unit is set up in a different way. It's not a copy-paste organizational model in each operational unit. So in some cases, there was a sustainability manager already, together with an accountant and a strategist. In other cases, there's no sustainability department because the unit is very small. It's just the strategy department. So it really depends, but I think it's important, of course, to have mixed teams. I do believe in the true value of diversity from different angles to get to better results. And that's something that we have seen. The results were somewhat heterogeneous, but in all cases, they were approved by the board of management. And I think that was important to have a realistic, ambitious plan, but one that is aligned to the general business plan.
Thanks. And then I would say the last question, and I think we need to stop then also because we're running out of time. Thanks everyone for participating so actively. In a nutshell, Professor Manuel Michaelis asks, what are the 3 main success factors to successfully implement sustainability?
I think the first thing is to make it purpose-driven. Really define a purpose that's very close to the core business. So you have that identification of the organization with a purpose. It's not a standalone thing. It has to be recognizable in the context of the core business. Second thing is you need to make it tangible. There need to be ambitious targets that are realistic, but it needs to be tangible in a way that it requires people to think. If you set targets that are completely out of reach, people get frustrated. And if you set targets that don't require any extra effort, any creative thinking, people won't bother. So I think finding the right ambition level is the second thing. And the third is stay focused, because it's important to not set targets for all ESG dimensions. We see corporates that really have 30, 40 targets. No one knows how to reach them because there's so many conflicts of interest and so many trade-offs. I think it's important to really stay focused.
David, thanks a lot. I really enjoyed the discussion. I think we see it also from the comments interaction. There's a great interest in the topic. Yeah. I wish, of course, that you sparked new thoughts in our audience and eventually we all take some good ideas from today to maintain our planet. Thanks a lot for being with us, spending the time. Of course, I wish you all the best for a successful year and your work with E.ON. Yeah. To everyone who joined today, I'd like to invite you, of course, to follow our Expert Powers page for the next events. And there will be many interesting speakers, of course, lined up, so don't miss out. I'd like to really say thank you for joining us today. Thank you, David, one more time. Take care and see you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.